Yes, good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. We are on to our third set of regulation this morning. So far, we've looked at rules of the air regulations. We've looked at the aerodrome design and operations regulations. And we are now going to look at draft civil aviation heliports regulation. Draft civil aviation heliports regulation. These regulations transpose the provisions of Annex 14, Volume 2, and they are designed to provide the guidelines on heliport operations in Kenya. As we welcome my colleague, John Akinywa, who will take you through the draft heliports regulation, it is important to remember, as from the beginning, that in 2013, we had one set of regulation known as aerodromes regulation, and the draft heliport regulation is a second set of regulation that stemmed from that voluminous regulation known as aerodromes regulation. So we've been able to dismember it into three parts, and this is the second part of the regulations. We also want to remind you that we will be running a rerun of a review of the personnel licensing regulations on Friday from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. So anybody who missed or would be interested in that rerun of a review of the personnel licensing regulation, you're welcome. For those who would like to join us again, we'd like to remind you of how to join us. Just visit our website, www.kcaa.or.ke. You can go to the legislation and publications. You'll see on top of that, there's draft regulation. When you open that, you'll see the words virtual public participation webinar. If you click on that, it will redirect you to the right page where you can join the right session of our live stakeholder engagement. I'm also informed that the stakeholder engagement is also being aired live on Facebook. If you can access Facebook, you can be able to follow our discussions. And if you post a question there, we will bring the question to this forum and be able to respond to your questions. So without further ado, allow me to welcome John Akinywa. John Akinywa, you can go ahead and present the draft Heliports Regulation 2021.
Thank you so much, Rollins. So we'll go ahead and present the Civil Aviation Heliport Regulation 2021. So these regulations are divided into 13 parts, and we also have 3 schedules with a total of 119 regulations. Yeah, I'll be displaying I'll be sharing the screen shortly, but the parts are as follows. We have part 1, which is the preliminary provisions, and then part 2, design and construction of heliports. Part 3 is heliport data. Part 4 is heliport physical characteristics. Part 5 is obstacle environment. Part 6, obstacle limitation requirements. Part 7 is visual aids. Part 8 is heliport emergency response. Part 9 is obligation of the operator. Part 11, information to be reported to Aeronautical Information Services. Part 12 is general provisions. And part 13 is offenses, penalties, and transition provisions. And then we have 3 schedules. The first schedule is on aeronautical data quality requirements. The second one is guidance material for instrument reports with non-precision and or precision approaches and instrument departures. And the last schedule is on figures and tables. Yeah, so I'll go to the matrix. I know it's quite voluminous, but on Regulation 2 interpretation, there were a number of definitions which were not in the regulations which we had prepared in 2018, but they were not published. And these definitions were That is the definition for D, and then design D, then D value, and the definition for elongated and route and route obstacle. Then two definitions were deleted: helicopter air taxiway, helicopter ground taxiway, and a new definition that replaced the two, that is helicopter taxiway, was introduced. And then we had changes in the definition on helicopter stand following the 5th edition of the Annex 14, and changes also in helicopter taxi route. A definition on landing location was deleted following Amendment 9 of Annex 14, Volume 2. And then there's a definition on obstacle, which was revised. Part D of it was deleted from Annex 14, Volume 2, and so we deleted it from our draft of 2018. And other definitions were introduced to the annex, and consequently we also introduced them in the regulation, that is touchdown position cycle or circle. And then we rewarded the use of common reference system for clarity. Initially it was regulation 4, and it was rewarded and moved to regulation 5. And then we have certification of licensing, certification and licensing of heliports. Yeah, this was a whole part 2 in the draft regulation, and this regulation were deleted and moved to the Civil Aviation Certification, Licensing, and Registration of Aerodromes regulations. And a small part was introduced under the same title, that is as Regulation 4, that a person shall not operate a heliport in Kenya unless it is certified or licensed under the Civil Aviation Certification, Licensing, and Registration of Aerodromes regulation. And it also had a sub-regulation 2 that's subject to sub-regulation 1. Heliport certification and licensing status shall be maintained through continuous oversight, safety assessment, and heliport compatibility studies. Yeah, so regulation 5 to 19, that was part 2 of licensing of heliports. It was deleted and moved to certification, licensing, and registration of aerodromes. Yeah, and then we introduced part 2 as design and construction of heliports, that is regulation 6 to 9. And all those requirements are highlighted from regulation 6 to 9. And then we have part 3, which is heliport data. Initially it was regulation 20, but moved to regulation 10. So they were moved to regulation 10. Let me share my screen now. So I'm moving to this is where we are, part 3, heliport data. Initially it was regulation 20, but was moved to regulation 10 following deletion of heliport licensing. So, and Regulation 10 states that this part applies to heliports except where otherwise specified. So the regulation was revised, moved to 10, regulation 20, subregulation 2 to 8 were deleted, and then a subregulation 2 rewarded and moved to 11. So those are, and then we had a new requirement. Sorry. Yeah, this one is on heliport data, and then regulation. This regulation was not there. That is on aeronautical data. So it was introduced as regulation 11, being a new provision that was provided for in ICAO Annex 14, Volume 2. And then heliport reference point, it was regulation 21 initially. It was rewarded for clarity and moved to regulation 12. But there was a slight change in subregulation 2, which we rewarded by deleting the word shall. Next is regulation 22. The number was changed to 13. Regulation 23, the number was changed to 14, and the regulation was rewarded for clarity, and subregulation 5 split into subregulations 5 to 7, and that regulation was numbered as 14. So the next one was regulation 24, declared the distances. Yeah, this one was just a change of regulation number from 25 to 15. Next one, regulation 30, coordination between aeronautical information services and heliport operators and owners. This was a new provision in the ICAO Annex 14, Volume 2, and it was introduced or included as regulation 16. The next one is rescue and firefighting. That was regulation. Initially, it was not in the provision, so it's a new provision in the ICAO Annex 14, which was introduced by Amendment 9 or the 5th edition of the Annex, and it was included as regulation 17. Next is Part 4, heliport physical characteristics. Yeah, and initially it was 25. It was moved to 18. Regulation 26 on surface level heliports operations in the FATO. It was this regulation was deleted, and there were some notes that had been included. So regulation 26 was deleted entirely, and there was a new provision which introduced the different kind of heliports. That is we start with the onshore heliports. It was not there initially, so it was included as regulation 19. And this is a regulation applying to surface level heliports and elevated heliports, unless otherwise specified. The next one was regulation 27, final approach and takeoff. Yeah, the provision, that is this regulation, it was deleted through Amendment 9 of Annex 14, but there was new provision introduced through the 5th edition of Annex 14, Volume 2. So these provisions were included as regulation 20. So most of these are standards, and if I was to read everything, it will be very difficult. So in this matrix, I put everything. That is the current regulation, the deficiency, and then the new text. And I believe that we are able to go through the text so that if we have any comments, then we can raise them. I move on to regulation 28. Initially, it was okay. The regulation is helicopter clearways. It was regulation 28, and the contents of the clearway were deleted except subregulation 2, and they were revised through Amendment 9 of Annex 14, Volume 2, and this regulation was moved to number 22. Yeah, with the new provision of ICAO Annex 14, Volume 2, 5th edition. Regulation 29 was touchdown and lift off area, and the requirement for safety areas, that is sub-regulations 8, 9, 12, and 16 were included in this regulation, which may bring about confusion. And the regulation was renamed safety area and provided as regulation 21. So there was a reorganization of this regulation that is on 8, sub-regulation 8, 9, 12, and 16, reorganized and to correctly capture the provisions of safety areas given in the 5th edition. Next, I go to touchdown and lift of area. It was regulation 29. So this regulation was split to have the safety area and to have safety area, protected side slope, and touchdown and lift off area, as you can see. So safety area was named 21, protected side slope 22, and touchdown and lift off area was named regulation 24. So this was just a reorganization of 29 for clarity in accordance with the provisions of the 5th edition of ICAO Annex 14, Volume 2. So next, it's regulation 30, helicopter ground taxiways and helicopter ground taxi routes. Yeah, so the provision of helicopter ground taxiways and helicopter ground taxi routes were deleted and replaced with new provisions. And those provisions were helicopter taxiways and taxi routes. And they were renamed Regulation 25 with the new provisions. Next is Regulation 31, helicopter air taxiways and helicopter air taxi routes. Yeah, Regulation 30 and 31 were deleted and they were replaced with the Regulation 25, as I highlighted earlier. And this Regulation 25 is helicopter taxiways and taxi routes. Initially, it was helicopter ground taxiways and helicopter ground taxi routes, and 31 was helicopter air taxiways and helicopter air taxi routes. So they were combined and came up with a new provision, helicopter taxiways and taxi routes. Regulation 32 was on helicopter stands. Yeah, this was moved to Regulation 26, but sub-regulation 1 to 9 and 11 are deleted, and new provisions introduced via Amendment 9 to Annex 14, Volume 2. And then sub-regulation 10 was rewarded and included in the new standard that is protected areas. We move on to the next regulation, that is regulation 33, location of a final approach and takeoff area in relation to a runway or taxiway. Yeah, in this regulation, sub-regulation 2 was a recommended practice and hence was deleted from the regulation. Next, we go to regulation 34. It was elevated heliports, and this regulation was deleted in the ICAO Amendment 9 of Annex 14, Volume 2. And so we as well deleted it from the regulations. Final approach and takeoff area and touchdown and lift-off areas, also deleted from Annex 14 through Amendment 9. Helicopter clearway, that was on Regulation 36, also deleted. Touchdown and lift-off areas were deleted from Annex 14, Volume 2. Safety areas, this provision was also deleted. Initially, it was Regulation 38. We move on to Regulation 39, helicopter ground and ground taxi routes. Helicopter ground taxiways and ground taxi routes were deleted from Annex 14, and we deleted them from the draft regulation, Regulation 40. Helicopter air taxiways and air taxi routes was also deleted. Then Regulation 41 on aprons, also deleted from Annex 14, Volume 2, Amendment 9. And then we have now a new regulation or a new provision, which now was introduced as Regulation 29. This is helidecks. So provisions for elevated heliports were deleted and they were replaced with helidecks as Regulation 29. Then we have the Regulation 42 was helidecks final approach and takeoff areas and touchdown and lift of areas. So this regulation, sub-regulation 1, 5, 7, 12, and 16 were recommended practices, and we deleted them from the draft regulations, and that regulation was renamed 30. So whatever is highlighted as yellow is the deleted text. Then Regulation 43, shipboard heliports. So this provision was deleted from Annex 14, Volume 2, and was rewarded and then changed to Regulation 31. These are the regulations for heliports aboard ship. And so they are to apply to helicopter operating areas provided in the bow or stem of a ship or purpose built above the ship structure. Regulation 44, final approach and takeoff area and touchdown lift off areas. So this Regulation 44, sub-regulation 8 was a recommended practice, and it was deleted from the regulation. And then provision for non-purpose build shipboard heliport was missing in the regulation. That is so and then sub-regulation 12 was split into two sub-regulations for clarity. And then this regulation was renumbered 32. 45, that is now we are now on part 5, obstacle environment, Regulation 45. It was just renamed to 33 due to the regulations that were deleted on heliport licensing. 46 was renumbered to 34. 47 was rewarded and renumbered regulation 35. And whatever is in yellow is what was included. Regulation 48 on transition surface. This one was renamed regulation 36. Regulation 49, takeoff climb surface. This was renamed regulation 37 without changes. And then regulation 50, obstacle-free surface and surface, obstacle-free sector stroke surface for helidecks. This was missing in the regulation, and so it was introduced as regulation 38. So subregulation 1 was rewarded for clarity. Additional subregulation 4 added following Annex 14 Volume 2 Amendment 9. And then the regulation was renumbered to from 50 to regulation 38. Then we go to obstacle limitation sector stroke service for helidecks. This regulation was, there was a mix-up of subregulations 2 and 3. And so the words shall be included in subregulation 1, and then subregulation 2 and 3 reorganized for clarity. And that regulation was renumbered 39. Then we go to part 6, obstacle limitation requirements. Starting with the regulation 52, it was renamed 40. Regulation 53 was rewarded and reorganized. And that is subregulation 3 was split into 2 subregulations. Subregulation 5 revised to include elevated heliports and split into 7 and 8 for clarity. Subregulation 6 was a recommended practice in the 5th edition of the Annex 14 Volume 2 and was deleted from the regulations. And then the regulation was renamed 41. That is from 53. Regulation 54, helideck. This regulation was rewarded to comply with the 5th edition of Annex 14 Volume 2. And consequently, subregulation 2 was split to have subregulation 2 to 5, and then the regulation was renamed 42. And next, we go to regulation 55 on shipboard heliports. So the provision of Annex 14 Volume 2 Amendment 9 were missing in the regulation, and the provision, we also had another deficiency, the provision with more than one requirement stated as one regulation leading to very long sentences. And so this one was just rewarded for clarity and renamed regulation 43. Next, we go to regulation 56, winching areas. This one was renamed 44, and then we go to part 7 of the regulations, that is visual aids. 57 was renamed 45, regulation 58. There was a recommended practice which had been included in the in the regulation, and some provisions in the regulation had very long sentences which are bringing confusion. So subregulation 2 was split and revised for clarity, and that regulation was renamed 46. 59, this one was rewarded for clarity. Regulation 60, Subregulation 1 rewarded for clarity, Subregulation 2 and 3 combined for clarity, and then Subregulation 5 split into 3 subregulations, and the 7 split into 3 subregulations also for clarity, and it was renamed Regulation 48. The next one is 61, maximum allowable mass marking. So the provisions for surface level heliports is a recommended practice, and it was deleted from subregulation 1. And subregulation 2 was also a recommended practice and proposed to be deleted from the regulation. Then 5 was split into 2 subregulations. And then 61 was renamed as 49. Next was D value marking. This one was rewarded for chirality by deleting subregulation 5 to 7 as though are recommended practices, and then subregulation 2 and 3 were revised following the amendment of Annex 14 Volume 2, and the regulation was renamed as 50. The next one is Regulation 63, Final Approach and Takeoff Area Dimension Markings. This provision was deleted following amendment of Annex 14, Regulation 64. It was rewarded for chirality rewarding subregulation 3, splitting subregulation 5 into 2 subregulations for markings and markers, and then 7 to 9 were reorganized to have a clear provision for paved and unpaved FATOS, and then subregulation 9 was introduced following amendment of Annex 14 Volume 2, and the regulation was named 51. Final approach and takeoff area designation marking for runway type FATOS. It was initially Regulation 65, and it was subregulation 2 was split into 4 subregulations and renamed 52. Next, Regulation 66, aiming point marking. This was rewarded by splitting subregulation 2 to have 3 and 2 and 3, and subregulation 3 was split into 3 to ensure that each requirement was captured separately for chirality, and it was renamed 53. Next, 67 was deleted from the provisions of Annex 14 Volume 2, and a provision of surface level heliport in subregulation 2 deleted from Annex 14 Volume 2 through Amendment 9, subregulation 3 rewarded for chirality, and Regulation 67 was renamed as 54. So we go next is 68. The entire regulation was deleted and replaced with a new provision. That is touchdown position marking, and that it was renamed 55. Next is heliport name marking. Subregulation 1 was split into 3 subregulations, and 5 split into 2 for chirality without any change on the content, and was renamed 56. Regulation 70, helideck obstacle-free sector, that is chevron markings, renamed 57. Helideck and shipboard heliport surface marking was 71 and moved to 58. And then helideck prohibited landing sector markings. Initially, it was deleted from provision of Annex 14 Volume 2 through Amendment 9. And next is helicopter ground taxiway markings and markers. The provision of helicopter ground taxiway markings and markers were amended through Amendment 9 and renamed helicopter taxiway markings and markers and moved to Regulation 59. I need a charger. So we continue. So Regulation 71, helideck and shipboard heliport surface marking was renamed 58. I think I've gone back a bit. I think, yeah, we were in Regulation 74, heliport air taxiway markings and markers. Yeah, the regulation was renamed 60. Next is 75, helicopter stand markings. It was renamed 61 after revising the regulation following amendment of Annex 14. Flight path alignment. Yeah, this subregulation 4 was split into two subregulation and renamed 62. 77 was lights, and here subregulation 3 in subregulation 3 was introduced in the regulation, and I can read subregulation 3. It says, in cases where operations into a heliport are to be conducted at night with night visual imaging systems, the helicopter operator shall assess and establish the compatibility of the night vision imaging system with the heliport lighting prior to use. 78, heliport beacon. It was a split into two provisions for clarity, renamed 64. Approach lighting system. Yeah, this there was we have a proposal to have it less prescriptive, but at the same time provide regulation for operators who may require approach lights. And it was renamed 65. Next is Regulation 80, flight path alignment guidance lighting system. Subregulation 1, 2, and 4 and 6 were recommended practices and they were deleted from the regulations. And the provision of characteristics of lights was included in the regulation and renamed as 66. Visual alignment guidance system, Regulation 81, subregulation 2 and 5 were deleted through provisions of Amendment 9 of Annex 14, Volume 2. So the regulation was renamed 67. Signal format was the requirement. The regulation was deleted following changes in the amendment, changes in Amendment 9. And then light distribution, this provision was also deleted. Approach track and azimuth setting, it was also deleted. Characteristics of visual alignment guidance system was deleted from Annex 14, and so it was also deleted in the draft regulation. Then visual approach slope indicator, the subregulation 2 and 3 were deleted through Amendment 9 of Annex 14, and the regulation was renamed 68 after that revision. happy signal format that was regulation 87, and it was deleted from the provision following amendment on Annex 14. Light distribution was also deleted. Approach, slope, and elevation setting was also deleted. Obstacle protection surfaces deleted from the regulations. Final approach and takeoff area lighting systems for surface level heliports. So this one was revised, that is revising sub-regulation 1 to include the words with a solid surface following the amendment 9. Sub-regulation 2 rewarded for clarity. 3 was split into 2. Part of sub-regulation 3 and 4 were deleted because they were recommended practices. Aiming point lights was sub-regulation 92, and it was revised for clarity and renamed 70. 93, touchdown and liftoff area lighting system. It was revised for clarity, that is in sub-regulation 3, 4, and then 5, and was renamed 71. Next we go to helicopter stand flood lighting. This was a new provision in the 5th edition of Annex 14 through Amendment 9, and was included as Regulation 72. Winching area floodlight. Sub-regulation 1 was split into 3 sub-regulations, and then it was renamed 73 from 94. Taxiway lights, rewarded and renamed 74. Visual aids for denoting obstacles. The title of the regulation was incomplete following amendments of Annex 14, Volume 2. So the regulation title was revised to visual aids for denoting obstacles outside and below the obstacle limitation surfaces. And it was renamed 75. Flood lighting of obstacles. Yeah, this one was rewarded for clarity and renamed 75. And we go to the next part, Part 8, helicopter emergency response. Application of, that is 98 was application of this part. It was rewarded and renamed 77. Regulation 99, heliport emergency planning. Sub-regulation 3 to 8 were recommended practices and were deleted from the regulation, and then sub-regulation 3 was introduced to indicate applicability and renamed 78. So 100 rescue and firefighting, sub-regulation 1 and 3 deleted and replaced with regulation 79. Level of protection to be provided, that was 101, now becomes 80. And 101 was replaced with new requirements following amendment of the annex. Rescue equipment, this regulation was deleted following amendment of Annex 14, Volume 2. Extinguishing agents, they were not okay. This is a new regulation that was introduced as a result of the new a new provision in the 5th edition of Annex 14. Personnel also is a new requirement, and it is regulation 82. Regulation 83 is also a new requirement in Annex 14. Becomes regulation 83. Then we move on. Obligation of the operator. Regulation 103 was renamed 84. Regulation 104 was rewarded and cross-referenced with the Civil Aviation Certification and Registration of Aerodromes Regulation and renamed 85. And then competence of operational and maintenance personnel was renumbered to 86. Heliport operations and maintenance regulation was realleged and rewarded for flow and quality and renamed Regulation 87. Regulation 107, storage of inflammable and other dangerous goods. It was we replaced the word permission with approval in part of that regulation, so it was a rewarding and it was renamed 88. 108, safety measures against fire. This one was rewarded and renamed 89. Regulation 90. This was not in the provision of Annex 14, Volume 2, so it was introduced by the new amendments, and it was named 90. Regulation 109, access to operations within restricted areas, renamed 91 with no changes. Entry into or exit from restricted areas of heliport. The regulation was rewarded for quality and renamed 92. Regulation was 111, test running of aircraft engine, renumbered 93. 112, certain acts prohibited on heliports, renumbered 94. Removal of obstructions from heliport movement surface, it was renumbered to 95. Maintenance of environment and management program, protection of navigation aids, those and responsibility of operator, they were renumbered to regulation 96, 97, and 98 from 114, 115, and 116. And then Regulation 117, inspection of heliports and unhindered access by inspectors of the authority. The regulation was rewarded and for clarity and renumbered 99. Next, powers of a heliport inspector. The word record was missing in this regulation. So it was introduced in Subregulation 2, pursuant to Subregulation 1, the designation shall include but not limited to carrying out inspections of the heliport facilities, equipment, documents, records, and personnel, and imposition of operating restriction when deemed necessary. And it was renamed Regulation 100. 119, notifying and reporting, was renumbered to 101. 120, heliport hover and movement area inspection. Yeah, the regulation was rewarded and revised to 102. Special inspections, that was just numbering from 121 to 103. The same with warning notices from 122 to 104. Regulations 123 to 127. Initially it was part 10 of the regulations, heliport manual, that were moved to the Civil Aviation Certification, Licensing and Registration of Aerodromes regulations. And then part 11, information to be reported to Aeronautical Information Services, Regulation 128, was revised and renamed 105. Regulation 129 on availability of information was revised and renamed 106. 130, action required for occurrences of operational significance other than those involved in electronic aids and communication facilities. This regulation was revised, that is by rewarding and numbered 107. The next is Regulation 131, actions required for occurrence that affect electronic aids and communication facilities, moved to 108. Aeronautical data reporting, moved to 109. Then on exemption, that part was deleted because it is covered in the primary legislation. That was part 12 initially. It was deleted from these regulations. 133, it was deleted because it is covered in the Civil Aviation Act. Application of exemption deleted from this regulation because it is in the Civil Aviation Act. And the same with 135 and 136. And then we go to Part 13, General Provisions. It was renamed 110. And then 138, there was a change of, initially it was change of name or of a license. So that the title was revised to change of a name, change of a certificate or license. But again, this regulation was also covered in the Civil Aviation certification, licensing, and registration of aerodromes. So it was deleted. 139 on change of address of a license, deleted because it is covered in the certification, licensing, and registration. The same with use and retention of licenses and records. 141, replacement of documents. This one was also deleted from this regulation covered in the Civil Aviation certification, licensing, and registration of aerodromes regulation. Then aeronautical user charges. It was renamed Regulation 111, condition for operating a heliport. The regulation was revised to include the word certified and renamed 112, lighting of en route obstacles. It was revised and renamed 113. And land use practices in the vicinity of a heliport became 114. 146 was a repetition, so it was deleted. It was a repetition of 145. And then 147, deviation from standard. That regulation was deleted. Next, safety inspection and audits, regulation 148. It was revised for clarity by deleting the word as prescribed and renamed the regulation 115. Obligation to ensure a heliport. Again, we removed the word, that word prescribed, and replaced it with specify. Renamed 116. Then the regulation on enforcement, it was deleted because this one is supposed to be prescribed in a general publication to cover all aspects of the authority. That was on enforcement. And then part 13, offenses, penalties, and transition provision. So contravention of regulation, that was 151, was deleted because it is captured under the Civil Aviation Act. The same with 152, appeals to the tribunal, also covered in the Civil Aviation Act. And then a new regulation 117 was introduced here, protection from personal liability. Yeah, this a new provision which had not been captured in this regulation. 153, the title was revised from offenses to offenses and penalties. The old text was deleted and a new text introduced for clarity. And 153 was renamed 118. Regulation 154, transition provisions. The regulation title was changed to transition provisions and renamed 119. So that is the end of my presentation. I take the meeting back to Rollins.
Thank you, Jonah. I think that was quite a lot of presentation with elaborate explanations on what has gone into the heliport regulations. From the questions, we have only seen one question that has been asked by Mr. Harrison Machio regarding certification and licensing of helipads, and is asking whether these helipads were helipads within a conventional aerodrome. Does it require independent certification or licensing? And we're saying you do not need two licenses or certificates. If the helipad or heliport is within the aerodrome, then it only needs to be reflected in the aerodrome manual and the procedures of the aerodrome that they also accommodate helicopters, and that would then suffice for one license. We will delve further into the issue of licensing of heliports and aerodromes in the subsequent session. But for purposes of your question, no, you do not need two licenses for that part. So I'll allow those who are able to, because I've only seen one question in the question section. If anybody would desire to take the microphone, again, we would be willing to accommodate. If you desire to have the floor, we would be willing to accommodate you so that we can be able to listen to a verbal presentation of a question before we can transit to the subsequent session on certification, licensing, and registration of aerodromes regulations. So any question? These regulations are very technical and specific to heliports. So if any question comes in mind, we remind you that you can still ask your question, or you can still communicate to us via the email kcas at kcas2021 kcas2021 at kcaa.or.ke, and we will be able to incorporate your view or respond to you as appropriate. Further, we would also be able to convene another session where we will explain how we have incorporated stakeholder views in the draft regulations. So if we do not have any other question or anybody seeking to have the floor, I would request that we take a 5-minute break before we convene for the next session. My colleague Dennis has posted for you a link on how to access the upcoming session. Please take note of the link so that in the next 5 minutes we can transit to the next session. So without further ado, we will ask the manager responsible for ANS or Aerodromes Oversight to make some closing remarks, and then we transit to the next section in 5 minutes. So David. The system is taking a bit of time, but I think it's going to pick. We urge you, or anybody who has a question, you can please get in touch with us on the email posted so that we can be able to prepare an adequate response or incorporate your suggestions in the final draft of the regulations that would be going for publication. So the stakeholder engagement or comment exercise is still on.
Thank you, Lawrence, who has been a good moderator for the session that we have had that was touching on the heliport regulation. Thank you, Kenya, for making the presentation. I think, colleagues, we have had a detailed presentation basically on initially on the design regulations and now on the heliport regulations. We appreciate the feedback that has been received, especially on the chat on the confirmation from Harrison. And as indicated earlier, we request that you can submit further comments and input on the provisions that have been shared. And if there's an issue that you would wish us to address, we'll be glad to do so. And subsequently, I think with the issues that have been raised, we'll be able to get back to you so that we can be able to indicate areas of improvement in compliance to the proposals that have been made, so that at least we can be able to move on with these provisions. I take this opportunity to thank you and request that we kindly hold on. The transition is going to be short, so that we can be able to move on to the certification, licensing, and registration of aerodrome regulation. Thank you so much, and see you shortly.